Derrick Cole sat in the back of the engine, gear already half on, helmet in his lap. He was calm, focused. After 8 years with the Memphis Fire Department, he had learned to quiet the adrenaline, to narrow his vision down to the seconds that counted. But tonight, something felt different. The dispatcher's voice had trembled. Not just a house fire. Not just another call. Possible entrapment, child upstairs. That was all Derrick needed to hear. He leapt off the truck before it came to a full stop. The house loomed in front of him, 2 stories of peeling paint and broken gutters, flames licking out from the upstairs windows, smoke curling like dark fingers into the night sky. The neighborhood had already gathered, barefoot residents in robes. A woman screaming on the porch, her voice cracking. "My baby's inside. Please, upstairs." Derrick didn't wait. He tightened his mask, grabbed his axe, kicked the door in, and vanished into the black. Inside, the air was thick, not just with smoke, but with weight, the kind that pressed on your chest before the fire ever touched you, the kind that made your heart race, because you didn't know how long the floor would hold. He moved fast, guided only by muscle memory and instinct, through the kitchen, up the creaking stairs, boots punching through soot-covered steps. He found her in a back bedroom, curled in a corner, coughing so hard she couldn't cry. She was small, no older than 6. Her pajama top was singed, her bare feet covered in ash. Derrick dropped to one knee and pulled off his glove. "Hey, sweetheart. You're okay now. I'm here." Her wide, terrified eyes met his, and for a moment the smoke didn't seem so heavy. He wrapped her in his jacket, lifted her into his arms, and turned back toward the flames. One hand on the railing, the other clutching her to his chest, he made his way back down as the fire roared behind him like it was angry to let her go. He pushed through the front door, and just as he hit the street, a different kind of danger greeted him. Flashing blue lights, dozens of them, shouting, guns drawn. "Put the child down. Hands in the air." Derrick froze. The girl whimpered against his chest. He tried to speak, but his throat was raw from the smoke. "She needs help," he rasped, staggering forward. On the ground. Now, someone grabbed the girl from his arms, rough, urgent hands pulling her away as she screamed again, this time in fear. Before Derrick could explain, before he could say the word firefighter, someone tackled him from the side. He hit the ground hard, cheek pressed to the asphalt, helmet knocked loose. He felt knees jammed into his back, hands wrenching his arms behind him, a knee on his neck, pressing. "I'm with the fire department," he tried to say. But they weren't listening. They were shouting over each other, calling him aggressive, non-compliant, a threat. One of them said, "He came out of the burning house with a child. Didn't see no ID on him." "That's my crew right there," Derrick gasped, trying to nod toward the fire truck. "That's my team." But no one looked. They only saw a black man in a soot-covered uniform, carrying a white child out of a fire, and they made their decision before he ever opened his mouth. Behind him, the house was still burning. His team, his brothers, were still inside, and he was face down on the cold street, in handcuffs, tasting blood in his mouth. It wasn't until one of the medics screamed, "That's Cole. He's on our crew." That someone finally paused. The officer holding Derrick looked confused. "He's what?" "He's a firefighter. You just cuffed one of ours." The silence that followed was louder than the sirens. The handcuffs didn't come off right away. Not until a supervisor arrived. Not until one of the senior captains came running out of the smoke, yelling Derrick's name like a curse against the stupidity of it all. The officers fumbled, apologized in that way they do when they know they messed up, but don't want to say it out loud. Misunderstanding. Thought he was a suspect. Just doing our job. But Derrick didn't say a word. He just stood up slowly, his knees shaking, not from the smoke, not from exhaustion, but from humiliation. The girl had already been loaded into an ambulance. She was safe, breathing, alive. But Derrick, he felt like something inside him had burned worse than anything the fire could touch. That night, Derrick went home with bruises on his ribs, blood on his lip, and a silence in his chest that wouldn't leave. He had saved a life, risked his own to do it, and still, to them, he was just another threat in the dark. The next morning, Memphis woke up to headlines. But not his headline. Not the story of a black firefighter who risked his life to save a little girl. Not the image of a man dragged in handcuffs while smoke still clung to his uniform. No, the headlines read, "Firefighter detained in confusion at blaze scene. Police mistake rescuer for suspect during chaos." Like it was just a glitch in the system. Like a man's dignity, his life, was a typo they'd fix later. Derrick Cole sat on his couch staring at the TV, his face still swollen, his shoulder still aching from being slammed into the ground. He hadn't slept, couldn't eat. His fire gear lay folded in a corner, still smelling of smoke and betrayal. The news anchors smiled as they read from the teleprompter. Officials say the situation was resolved peacefully, and the firefighter was released after the misunderstanding. But they didn't show the part where his face was mashed into the pavement. They didn't show the taser marks on his side. They didn't show the girl's tear-streaked face as she was pulled from his arms like he was a criminal. That night changed something in Derrick. It wasn't just about what happened. It was the silence that followed. His captain didn't call. The department sent no official apology. The union rep offered to look into it, but made it clear that pushing back could stir things up. And the officers who had pinned him down, not one showed their face again. What hurt most was how normal it all felt. Derrick had grown up in a world where his skin was a warning. Even in uniform, even with a badge, even with soot on his face and a child in his arms, he was still seen as a threat first. The badge didn't matter. The uniform didn't matter. Not to them. A week later, the firehouse held a ceremony. Not for him. Not for the little girl he saved. But for the squad as a whole. A job well done under pressure. Derrick stood in the back, arms crossed. He listened as the chief praised their courage, their unity, their composure. They clapped for each other, smiled for the camera. No one mentioned the handcuffs. No one mentioned him. Later that evening, one of the younger guys from his squad, Chris, pulled him aside. "Hey man, I just want to say, I saw what happened that night. That was messed up. I'm sorry." Derrick just nodded, because what was he supposed to say? "Thank you for noticing I got tackled while saving a child. Glad to know you watched while they put a knee on my back." It wasn't enough. He started having dreams. Not of fire. He was used to those. No, now he dreamed of flashlights, of cold steel cuffs, of voices yelling, "He's got the child." Like he was a monster stealing innocence instead of returning it. His therapist called it trauma-induced identity crisis. He called it truth, finally catching up. 3 weeks later, a video surfaced. Someone from a neighborhood had recorded it all. The tackle, the confusion, the screaming neighbors, the girl crying for him as they pulled her away. And most importantly, the moment when Derrick yelled clearly, "I'm a firefighter, check my crew." And they didn't listen. The video went viral. Within 48 hours, it was on every major platform. Black firefighter wrongfully arrested during rescue. He saved a life. They treated him like a criminal. Another black man in uniform, still not safe. People were angry, outraged, demanding answers. Protests sparked outside City Hall. Signs that read, "Protect the protectors." Firefighter, not suspect. Derrick deserves justice. The mayor released a statement calling the incident unfortunate. The police department promised an internal review. The fire chief, finally, called Derrick personally. "We should have had your back," he said quietly. Too little, too late. Derrick didn't want revenge. He wanted truth. He wanted them to say it plainly. "We didn't see your badge. We didn't see your bravery. We saw your black skin, and we assumed the worst." But they never said it. They never would. He took a leave of absence after that. He needed time. Time to breathe. Time to grieve the belief he once held, that uniform could protect him from what this world had always seen in him. One night, weeks later, he visited the little girl's house. Her mother answered the door, eyes wide with recognition. "You saved her," she whispered, voice cracking. Derrick nodded. "Is she okay?" "Because of you," she said. "She still has nightmares, but she asks about you. She calls you her guardian." He smiled, a tired, quiet smile. Not because it fixed anything, but because for that child, he wasn't a suspect. He was her hero. The fire had long gone cold, but the burn remained. 3 months had passed since that night. The night they pinned Derrick Cole to the pavement like he was nothing but a threat. 3 months since they arrested a firefighter while he was saving a life. And in those 3 months, the city moved on. The headlines disappeared. The protests faded. The mayor gave another speech about rebuilding trust. And the police department issued its final statement. No policy violations found. Officers acted within the scope of protocol during a high-stress response. That was it. No names released. No accountability. No public apology. Just another file closed. Another black man told to be grateful it wasn't worse. But Derrick, he couldn't move on. Every time he passed the firehouse, his chest tightened. He hadn't gone back since taking leave. He didn't know if he ever could. He missed the job. Not the bureaucracy, not the brass, but the mission. Saving people. Running into danger when everyone else was running out. But now he understood something bitter and deep. He had been trained to save lives, but they were trained to see him as a threat, even with a child in his arms. At first, he tried to stay quiet. He told himself, "It'll blow over. Don't make waves. Just let it pass." But silence has weight, and every time he swallowed his voice, he felt it pushing deeper into his chest. One night, he sat alone in his apartment, watching the body cam footage again. Someone had leaked it online. He watched himself step out of the burning house, soot-covered, limping slightly, holding the girl, and he heard the screams again. He watched the officers charge, watched himself disappear under a pile of uniforms, watched as the people shouted, "He's a firefighter. Look at his jacket." And still, they didn't stop. He shut the laptop and stood. His hands were shaking. That was the moment he knew. If they were going to bury the truth, he would dig it up himself. The next morning, Derrick reached out to a local journalist, Maya Brooks, a black reporter who had covered the original story but had been pushed off the follow-up when city pressure came down. She met him at a quiet diner off Lamar Avenue, a notebook already open. "You ready to talk?" "Not just talk," Derrick said. "Tell the whole damn truth." Over 2 hours, he gave her everything. The bruises, the silence, the way they tried to gaslight him into believing it wasn't that bad, the way the department told him it would be best if he stayed low until things cooled off. "They don't want justice," he told her. "They want me quiet." Maya looked him in the eye and said, "Then let's make sure your silence isn't the story." The article dropped 3 days later. Front page. Bold headline. "Pinned down while saving lives. The firefighter they tried to forget." It hit harder than anyone expected. Clips from the article spread like wildfire. News outlets who ignored him before were now calling his phone nonstop. Suddenly, they couldn't bury it anymore. And that's when City fought back. The fire department issued a careful response. "We understand Mr. Cole's frustration, but deny any wrongdoing. We stand by our team." The police union called it a distortion of facts. A city councilman accused Derrick of grandstanding. And the chief of police? He went on live TV and said, "Mr. Cole escalated the situation by failing to identify himself clearly during a chaotic emergency. Our officers responded appropriately." Derrick watched that press conference alone, sitting on the same couch where he'd sat the night after the fire. He didn't cry, didn't yell. He just felt hollow, not because of what they said, but because of how familiar it all was. They weren't defending the officers. They were defending the system. A system that didn't know how to say, "We were wrong." But he wasn't alone anymore. The girl's mother released a statement of her own. It was raw, unfiltered. "That man saved my daughter's life. She calls him her angel. And the way they treated him? It was evil. If he was white, he'd be a hero right now, not a headline." Soon, former firefighters began speaking out too, especially black ones, sharing their own stories of being stopped, searched, questioned in uniform, of being doubted by the very people they were sent to help. It was like Derrick's story had opened a floodgate, and what poured out wasn't just rage. It was truth, finally being spoken. Derrick was invited to speak at a community town hall. He almost didn't go. He hated public speaking. He hated being the face of something so painful. But when he stood behind that mic and looked out at a crowd filled with people who looked like him, people who had felt what he felt, he found his voice again. "They tried to silence me, try to make me think what happened wasn't real. But this ain't just about me. This is about every black man who did everything right and still got treated like a threat. I wore the uniform. I saved a life. And they still saw me as the enemy. We can't fix what we don't admit. And I'm not here to make anyone comfortable. I'm here to make sure it never happens again." The crowd rose to their feet, not just because of what he said, but because they saw themselves in his story. Derrick had become more than a firefighter, more than a headline. He was a mirror, reflecting a truth this country keeps trying to look away from. The courtroom wasn't grand. No golden domes, no long red carpets, just a plain wooden floor, a few rows of hard benches, and the kind of fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired. But for Derrick Cole, It felt like the weight of a country rested on that room. He wasn't there for revenge. He wasn't suing for money. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He was there to be heard. Loud, clear, unshaken. It had been nearly 5 months since the fire. 5 months since they tackled him to the ground in front of a burning house. 5 months since he saved a child, only to be arrested for it. But now, the city was being forced to listen. Not because it wanted to, but because it had no choice. A coalition of civil rights attorneys, backed by local activists and a growing list of former firefighters, had brought forth a motion for an independent investigation. It wasn't easy. City officials pushed back. The police union called it an attack on law enforcement. And one local station aired a segment titled, "From Hero to Headache, the Firefighter Stirring Controversy." But public pressure kept mounting. Petitions, marches, even national coverage. Derrick's voice had become a movement. When he took the stand that day, he didn't bring notes. He didn't need them. The courtroom was silent as he spoke. "I want to tell you what I remember most from that night. It wasn't the fire. It wasn't the little girl's face. It wasn't the sirens. It was the feeling of the ground against my cheek, and the realization that it didn't matter what uniform I wore. To them, I was still a threat. I kept yelling, 'I'm a firefighter. She's safe.' But they didn't hear me. Or maybe they did, and chose not to listen." You could feel the unease in the room. A white city council member shifted in his chair. A police rep avoided eye contact. Reporters scribbled faster. Derrick continued, "What happened to me wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. I was just unlucky enough to survive it, and loud enough to name it." The crowd behind him, a mix of residents, activists, retired black firefighters, nodded silently. Some were crying. Others had fists clenched tight in their laps. Later that day, the city called on witnesses to explain protocol. A police training coordinator described confusion during high-risk emergencies. A department rep said, "Our officers had no way of verifying Mr. Cole's identity in that moment." But then Maya, the journalist who had first written Derrick's full story, submitted evidence. A timestamp bodycam clip, showing Derrick clearly shouting his name, rank, and fire station. Twice. You could hear an officer respond, "Shut up and stay down." The courtroom shifted. The truth hit like a brick. And then, the mother of the little girl Derrick saved was called to testify. She stepped up, holding a small photo in her hands. "This man saved my baby's life. I watched him carry her out of that house like she was his own child. And then I watched the police throw him to the ground like a criminal. My daughter still asks me, why did they hurt the man who saved me?" You could hear a pin drop. By the end of the day, no one could pretend anymore. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was what the system had been built to do: distrust, discredit, and dehumanize black men, even when they were risking their lives for others. 2 weeks later, the independent investigation released its findings. The report was 78 pages long, but the conclusion could have been one sentence. The use of force against Mr. Derrick Cole was unjustified. For the first time, the city was forced to confront itself in the mirror, and it didn't like what it saw. The mayor held a press conference. She stood stiffly at the podium, flanked by lawyers and officials. "We regret what occurred that night and extend our apologies to Mr. Cole." But it wasn't just an apology this time. The city pledged to launch mandatory anti-bias and de-escalation training for first responders, implement a dual verification protocol at fire and crime scenes, allocate funding to an independent civilian review board with oversight powers, and most importantly, issue a formal, public commendation to Derrick Cole for his heroism. The firehouse where he once worked invited him to speak. They offered to reinstate him, even name a community room after him. Derrick went. He stood in front of the same lockers, looked at the same faces. Some smiled with guilt. Others looked away. He said only this: "I didn't want to be the face of a movement. I wanted to be a firefighter. But if speaking out means the next black man in uniform gets treated like a human being first, then I'll speak every damn time." As he walked out of the firehouse, kids from the neighborhood ran up to him. "That's him, the hero from Fire." One girl tugged his sleeve and asked, "You gonna be on TV again?" He laughed gently. "Maybe, but only if they get the story right this time." Derrick Cole never put the uniform back on, not because he didn't love the job, but because he had come to understand something painful and powerful. His fight wasn't just with flames. It was with the fire beneath the system, the one that scorched quietly, invisibly, until someone screamed. And Derrick had screamed. loud enough for the whole country to hear. He turned down the city's offer to return to active duty. He thanked the firehouse for the honor, the apology, the plaque they offered with his name engraved. But he said, "My place isn't inside that building anymore. It's out here, making sure this never happens to another black man in any uniform." And so, he shifted from firefighter to activist, from paramedic to protector of truth. He didn't trade one badge for another. He traded silence for a voice. With Maya Brooks, the journalist who'd first told his story, Derrick co-founded a nonprofit called Code Red, the Derrick Cole Foundation for Justice in Emergency Response. Its mission? Simple, but revolutionary: to expose racial bias in fire, medical, and law enforcement systems, and protect first responders of color from being targeted, harassed, or killed while serving the very public they swore to protect. At first, they worked out of a tiny office space in the back of a closed-down bookstore. No money, no sponsors, just a desk, a whiteboard, and a Wi-Fi router that barely reached the corner. But stories poured in. A black EMT in Texas handcuffed at a traffic stop while transporting a patient. A Latino firefighter in Arizona accused of impersonating fire personnel while wearing his department-issued gear. A black nurse in Georgia forced to the ground outside a hospital after a patient's family assumed she was stealing drugs from her own bag. Each case was different, but the thread was always the same. They weren't believed. They weren't protected. They were seen as threats before they were seen as people. Derrick made his mission to fight back. He spoke at universities. He trained new recruits. He testified in state legislatures, demanding that protections be written into law, not just posted on station walls. He didn't come with fancy degrees or million-dollar donors. He came with scars, and those spoke louder than any title ever could. In time, Code Red grew. Within 2 years, they had secured funding to build a national emergency responder safety hotline, a direct line for first responders of color to report harassment or misconduct while on duty. In year 3, Derrick was invited to Washington, D.C., to speak before the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. He stood at that podium, just like he had in that courtroom years ago. He looked around and said, "You tell us to be heroes. You tell us to run into danger. But when we come out of the fire, you still don't see us as human. Black paramedics, Latino medics, Native firefighters. We save lives and still get treated like suspects. We're not asking for special treatment. We're demanding protection equal to the risk you ask us to take." The room was still. Some nodded, some squirmed, but no one could deny it anymore. Derrick Cole was no longer just a victim. He had become the spark they feared most. A black man who refused to be quiet. A survivor who refused to stop speaking. On the 3rd anniversary of the fire, Derrick returned to the same street where it all happened. The house was rebuilt. The neighborhood looked cleaner. But the streetlights still buzzed faintly over the exact spot where he had been pinned to the pavement. He stood there in the cold, jacket zipped tight. In his hand, he held something small. Not a flag, not a banner. A necklace. His dog tags. He bent down and placed them quietly against the sidewalk. Not to mourn, to mark the place where he was broken, and where he was reborn. A group of local kids walked by and recognized him. "Hey, you're that guy from the news." He smiled. "Used to be. Now I'm just a man making sure people like me get home safe." They asked him questions. One girl asked if he missed being a firefighter. He paused, then said, "I still am. Just fighting a different kind of fire now." And as he walked away, the street felt different. Not healed, not perfect, but aware. Because of Derrick, it had been seen. Because of Derrick, it could no longer pretend it wasn't burning. They tackled him to the ground like a threat, but he rose up a symbol. They tried to silence him, but he became a voice for every black hero this system tries to erase. He was never just a firefighter. He was the fire they couldn't put out.